Hi, I'm Diane Hullett, and welcome to the Best Life, Best Death podcast. You can find out more about my work at bestlifebestdeath.com. And I'm here today with a special artist from Tucson. Hi, Jackie.
Hello there.
So, this is Jackie Schuld, and Jackie's an art therapist and an artist in Tucson, Arizona. And I, as my listeners know, like to bring in kind of, the creative angle to all of this because I think creativity is such a powerful force in our lives, whether we're actively creating ourselves something, making something, or whether we're kind of like enjoying the fruits of other people's creativity as a way to support us. And that's kind of how I ran across Jackie. So a friend of mine took a grief workshop. I think it was a 2-day grief workshop in Boulder. And as part of the grief workshop, they gave out copies of Jackie's book. And Jackie's book is called Grief is a Mess. And on the cover is this little character who I think might be like a little guinea pig.
Yeah, or hamster.
And another character who's kind of like a little frog.
Yeah.
And so Jackie found a way to just really visually portray that grief is a mess. So I love that, Jackie. Welcome. And tell us about how this book came to be.
Yeah. So my mother had cancer, ovarian cancer, and it was a long process where she knew it was terminal. So she had years of where she was just going through maintenance chemotherapy. And we came across the 5 stages of grief. And we were like, that is not enough. Like there are more stages. And so as a joke for Christmas, I made her a little illustrated book of like all the other stages. And it was just, yeah, it was supposed to be funny, and it was. But so then when she passed away, which was in 2014, I decided to make a book about grief, originally intending to use those illustrations, but then I made new ones because I really just saw that everyone in my family had a different response to grief. And so like every single one of the cartoons in my book is either something I felt or I saw a family member or friend feel or experience.
Go through. I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
Like, for example, one of the pages is I love the page of the little guy. Here we go. Here we go. The little guy just in a clear bowl. He's like in a clear baking bowl, and it's sort of the little hamster guy, and he just looks completely flopped and isolated and stuck in this glass bowl. And it really captures something about how that isolation can feel sometimes.
When I think too about like the slipperiness of a bowl where you're like trying to get out, but you can't. And so like,
and you can see through, you can see.
Yeah, and eventually you're just
doing. Just mashed up against it. Yeah. I love that. So you kind of use your family as like the test case for like, what are people's responses and how do you capture those in a cartoon? And then I'm sure sort of how do people respond to the cartoon? Like, how does this one feel? And is this one accurate?
Yeah, there were originally, I think, 76 pages.
Wow.
The book like 30 something. So I had to cut it down. And but a lot of the book was also that I had some family members and friends that had very strong opinions about how I should be grieving. And it was very constricting. And so in a way, the book was a chance to be like, let me grieve how I grieve.
Yeah.
And I will let you grieve how you grieve.
Yes. Oh, I think that's actually a really powerful message because people grieve in really different ways and also in really different time frames, right? Yeah. So one person might be at point B one day and the other person's at point G, and then the second person goes to point B, and there's a lot of movement and challenge, I think, with it.
Yes. And, for instance, around anniversaries, like sometimes people want to really mark those days. And then I have some family members that we don't want to do anything. We want to pretend the day doesn't happen, right. And so I think it's okay for both to coexist.
Right. And how to make space for both.
Yes. And honor both. Like there's nothing wrong with you if you don't want to celebrate that day. And there's nothing wrong with you if you want to like make it a special day.
Right. Right. All of the above.
Yeah.
Say more about some of your favorite pieces in the book.
Well, I must say, today is actually 8 years since my mom died. Like today is the
Wow.
death
Today's the
anniversary.
anniversary. Wow.
Yeah, so I'm definitely thinking more about like what it's been like in each year as it's gone by.
Yes.
I know in the beginning there's a lot more anger. Like if you look at, there's the one, it's the walruses in the book,
Uh-huh.
where one of the walruses is asking like, why can't you just be happy?
Yes.
And then the other walrus, yeah, and then the other walrus is like, if I whacked you on the head, would you be happy? And I just heard that a lot right after my mom died. I really, really was in a deep, dark place for a while. And a lot of my friends, we were like, their advice was like, just choose to be happy. And I also think, you know, I was, how old was I? 28, I think. And so a lot of my friends hadn't experienced that kind of pain. And they were genuinely trying to help, but it was infuriating. It
Yeah.
was like, if I could choose, if I could do that, I would.
Right.
But I can't right now. Whereas now I'm 8 years out and I can choose a little more and I have a little more breathing space around my grief.
Right. That's incredible that we just happened to plan this interview on
I
this.
know, right? I was excited because, and that's another thing I've learned. I like to do things on this day that honor my mom in some capacity. And so when this came up, I was
Perfect.
like,
Perfect.
yes.
That's
Yeah.
incredible. It's incredible. And we're recording this on February 23rd. So it'll go up in a few weeks, but
Oh yeah,
February
yeah.
23rd marks the anniversary, just to like note that date. Really powerful. Other ones that stand out?
Well, I guess I brought that up too, because I remember when grief was raw for me, I just had a lot of anger. Lot of anger. Like my sister was getting married and my mom wasn't there for that. And so there's toucans in the book where one toucan's asking, like saying something like, I wish my mom was here. And the other toucan, yeah, that one, where it's like, I wish my mom was here to see me get married. And the other one's like, what can I say? And that was her husband. And yeah, like what can you say? It's just, yeah, it's just sad.
Passages missed.
Yes. Yeah. I think that's so much about grief too, is not just like all these things you envisioned in your head about like, oh, she'll be here for this or this event or like a wedding, and then she's not, like that. Those are hard.
Right. And they come up every year. I remember my aunt talking about that when her son died, and she, she just said, well, the first year there's just all these anniversaries, even vague ones, like the first summer without him. Like there were the seasonal ones, and then there were the specific dates that are like big holidays,
Yeah.
and then there were dates specific to them. And I remember her talking about that first calendar year just being really something, and that it softens over time, but it doesn't really end. It just softens.
Yes, it softens, and at times you have to renegotiate. Like my dad did get remarried, and that was like we had to kind of renegotiate what our new family was doing for Christmas or holidays, and like that was challenging at first to be like, I want to honor mom in the ways we used to, and yet to honor like she's a new member of the family wanting her own traditions, and like, yeah.
Right. So. Figuring out that blend.
Yes. And it did not come naturally.
And doing it with sort of as much grace as you can muster.
Yeah. And that also, again, it's the same as honoring that like everybody wants something different. And how do we best compromise and still get to be together as a family?
Well, and I go back to, how do we even have the conversation, right? Like here's this new stepmom or dad's second wife. And how do you even sort of have the conversation about how do we do these traditions differently? Right.
And I think I used to, I don't know if I avoided it, but now I'm much more like, we're going to talk about this, where it's like, once you go through a holiday and you don't talk about it and feel so horrible, I was like, I don't want to go through that again. Let's just talk about it. Let's make some plans.
Right. And do you find like for you and your family, was that easier to do sort of like one-on-one, like first you and your dad or first you and a sibling, or did you just kind of have a big group conversation?
I don't remember what I tried initially. I just know it didn't work. So I know what does work is one-on-one conversation.
Yeah, one-on-one.
So I'll individually talk to my dad. I'll individually talk to my stepmom, and I'll individually talk to my, all the other people
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. Cause I think about it as almost like in my mind, it's like a series of small conversations that kind of shape into something organic that feels right. As opposed to
Right.
somebody saying, here's the new plan. Everybody
Right. And
do this.
yeah, and I'm not trying to make the plan for everyone. I'm just going to my dad, for instance, saying like, "Hey dad, like I really would like some small way to recognize mom on the Christmas tree. Would you feel comfortable with that?" It's just
Right.
specific things for my own needs, not trying to like take over.
Yeah. 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 I love that. I love that. Like honoring what you need and then bringing it into the bigger context of the family.
Right. And sometimes like the answer is no. And that's when, I meet my own needs. Then I make my own little tree. Or I didn't have to do that, but that's,
Yeah.
there's
Yeah. You could
kind of have to learn
metaphorically.
that as well. Like, okay, this doesn't work for them, so what can I do for
Right.
myself?
Well, going back to the 5 stages of grief, that I think has become, I think it's interesting. It's like it became Elizabeth Kubler-Ross developed that work. And I think it's really powerful work because it gave us as a society kind of a framework for talking. But I
Mhm.
think it's gotten really, I think it's misunderstood and kind of widely tossed around, right? Like, A,
Right.
it's not that linear. B, are we referring to the dying person grappling with their terminalness, or are we talking about the bereaved? Like what do these 5 stages
Yeah.
even mean? So I love that you kind of threw it out and said, yeah, forget 5, how about 72?
Yeah. When I think I didn't even understand the original intention of that model when I mentioned it in my book. I think in my book, I just said someone came up with 5 stages. Like I didn't even bother to look it up. Like, and that was an interesting thing about this book is I did not do a lick of research, read a single book about grief. Like I was at a place in my own grief that I couldn't read. I couldn't really take in information. It was exhausting. And so I was just painting away and in a way I'm glad it happened that way because it just came out raw.
Yeah, it came out raw and it came out really true to your experience, and you just let it be true without having to be like, well, is there research backing this
Yeah.
idea that you feel as the
Yeah.
walruses feel or something? Huh, beautiful. How many people has this book touched, do you know?
Oh, I don't know. I do know I've sold about 20,000 copies, and it's kind of its own little animal now in that people just buy it on Amazon and I'm like, "Oh, that's nice." Um, so yeah,
So
and I self-published it. So that was also kind of fun to see where it could go on its own.
really fun. I mean, just the other day on Instagram, a doula group somewhere in the East asked about children's books about grief. They said we're compiling a list for children's and families to use, and this one wasn't on there, so I threw it on there. I
Oh,
was like, hey,
thank
check out
you.
Grief is a Mess. Yeah, because I just think it's such a I don't know. I just think it's such a nice opening of what the experience is. That, as you said, you're not trying to be on someone else's map for how this should be. You're really trying to experience it yourself in awe, its rawness and complexity. And I think your book, in a playful way, opens up that conversation.
I'm glad you said that. That was the other main intention of my book was to get the humor. That like there are these like it's so the emotions are so intense that it is kind of funny sometimes.
Love, well,
like
right on the back, it says, through humorous animal characters, she shows that although there is no straightforward map through grief, there can still be laughter and positive experiences amidst the mess.
yeah, and I think that's so true that like and that's why I wanted to use animals so that anyone could relate to it regardless of race or gender, that you could really be like, oh man, I'm having a hamster day, or like or now with my own clients, I'll ask them like, which animal do you identify most with right now? That kind of
Yeah,
thing.
yeah. Tell us about your work as an art therapist. Do you specialize in grief, or is that just one thing that comes?
I originally did. When I started my art therapy practice, I specialized in grief, and then it just kind of shifted over time. Now I see primarily women that have a high amount of emotions and thoughts, and so I specialize more in that now. But
Interesting, almost like calming or focusing or moving
um,
anxiety, or
really, basically, people that have overactive minds and feelings. So kind of like the like grief is a mess, where it's like, here's all my feelings and all my thoughts, and how do you deal with that?
right.
So
I'm going to hold up another little picture. I love this one
Mhm.
too. It's the giraffe and the gnu. Is that how you pronounce that? The GNU
what's so
animal?
funny? I don't even remember.
GNU or new?
I don't, yeah,
Antelope.
I was,
Let's call it an antelope.
yeah, antelope.
And so the antelope is staying very busy with a long to-do list, and the giraffe is quietly meditating. And you know that each of those are really different strategies that come into play at different times.
Yeah, I know, because I remember in the beginning with grief, I was in such a fog that I really so appreciated if someone was like, okay, here's what you need to do. I just needed someone to kind of give me a to-do list and okay, I can get through that. Now, don't want anyone telling me what to do.
Different stage, different part of the mess. Have you created other books, Jackie, or is this the one?
I have. I did one called Making It Through Chemotherapy, which was about my mom's experience doing, 5+ years of chemotherapy and staying positive through it.
Fabulous,
So,
fabulous. Do you have any books in your mind that might come out?
not right now. I kind of learned with Making It Through Chemotherapy wasn't as good of a book, frankly. And I think it's because it didn't come solely from like my experience. And so that kind of taught me to only create like something at this level, to only create from my own lived experience. That's when I'm most effective. So I'm just kind of living my life, and if I feel called, I will do it, and if not,
Yeah,
I won't.
I love that, kind of waiting to see, but I love that
Yeah.
the authenticity of this book is part of what makes it so strong.
Yes, I mean, and I do write now. Like I write on my blog daily, so I'm much more writing as opposed, and I do art accompanying it, but I'm not like pulling together a book or anything.
So great. Well, I can imagine, again, my friend came across this book in a grief workshop, which I think was a really powerful piece for her to both take the workshop and then come across this playful book in the midst of it. And so I think about that like if you're listening and you're thinking, oh, I have a friend who's grieving, would this be an appropriate book? I sort of think, well, it depends on the timing of it, right? Like,
Yes.
and on the right day, it might be a really sweet nudge to say, I thought of you and I thought of how complicated everything is and all your big feelings and came across this book.
Right. Like I would not recommend like if someone just died that you stick the book in the mail. Like don't do that.
No, too soon.
like it's
Good
all
advice.
over.
Too soon. Get a copy yourself, take a look, wait for the right timing. And it probably depends on
and that like
the family member.
I don't know about you, but in my experience, there's so much support right away when someone dies. And then about 2 weeks to a month later, it just drops off and you're like, oh, I'm out here all alone.
Yes.
Does anyone remember I'm going through this?
Yes.
Like it's just very, very lonely. And I think that's the time to like send a book or make a phone call to really reach out.
Yes, I think that's really, really good sound advice. And then remembering those anniversaries if you can, the special days, and just saying, thinking of you.
Yeah. And my friends, the ones that have experienced loss, I will specifically ask them in advance, like, hey, I know this anniversary is coming up. What do you like? Do you like, because I have some family members that don't want the day acknowledged. And then I have some that are like, yeah, give me a call, so.
Right. I love that. So we can we for ourselves and we for others can be deliberate, be conscious about how we want to go through that and ask for it.
I know I have so many therapy clients that are upset with how people treat them, we'll say, about their grief or whatever's happening. And then I ask, like, but have you asked them for what you really want or told them? And they're like, well, no, and they feel embarrassed to do that. And it's like, I get it. I used to be there, but now I've really learned, like, just ask.
Right. Just ask. That's so funny because I had a late phone call recently and I thought, well, I've implied that my family should make dinner, so I'm sure they will. And I got off this late phone call and I came downstairs and lo and behold, they hadn't done anything. I was like, what? And then I thought, well, they can't read my mind. So the next time I had a late phone call, I was like, hey, could you do this? And could you do this? And I'll be down at 6:15 and we'll all eat. And that was much more satisfying, but I was kind of cracking up like, wow, at this stage in my life, I still think people can read my mind.
Well, and people feel like, oh, if they cared about me, then they would do this and they would know. But like a lot of times, even myself with my own friends, who are grieving, I'm like, oh, I don't know what to do.
Right. And
Even
you've
being
got a lot
having
of
it's like a little
experience.
paralyzing. You're like, oh, what's the right thing to do?
Right. And
So
I
like,
think
'cause
this is part of the, like, we're swimming in this kind of grief phobic culture. So everyone gets so fearful of doing the wrong thing that they
yes,
sort of pull back and do nothing sometimes. Not everyone,
yes.
generalizing.
Well, but that's why like it's so relieving when someone tells you exactly what they want.
Yes.
It's like, oh, thank God. Okay, I can do that. You want
Yes.
a meal? I'm bringing a meal. Like,
Yes. I love
yeah,
that. Well, that seems like maybe a great place to just kind of end with this kind of like, ask for what you want and listen when people say.
yeah. I like it.
Beautiful. Beautiful. I love it. I've been talking with Jackie Schuld, and she's an artist and art therapist down in Tucson, Arizona. This has been so great, Jackie. I can't wait to share your book.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah. So again, her book is titled Grief is a Mess. And it's a wonderful, I believe these are watercolors, little
Yeah.
watercolor pen
Yeah.
ink drawings. And you can find out more about her at JackieSchuld.com. It's JackieSchuld.com.
It's a
Great.
lot, but you got it right.
I got it in. I'm Diane Hullett. You've been listening to the Best Life, Best Death podcast. Thanks for listening.